The beach is the best place to be, especially in the summer. However, there is no place that does not have its own sort of evil, and the beach is no exception. There are times that you may think that the beach is paradise, but there are a lot of evils that go on here. But what are some of the most horrific experiences on the beach? Today, we look at 7 beach horror stories that will definitely keep you awake all night. It's you. It was just me, Maddie, and my little cousin Paul down at Crosby Beach on the weekend. We had gone there to enjoy some nice weather that had been going around for some time. It was a Sunday afternoon, and we had a few beers and a disposable barbecue. All we wanted was a nice little scran and some bevies. However, we had no idea our little outing would turn into a nightmare. We got there and started on our barbecue, but the wind picked up and we had to move into some sort of pit among the sand dunes. We were just listening to music and drinking a few beers, so we didn't even realize that it was heading to 9 at night. However, it was still very sunny out, and the beach was basically empty at this point. As the sun sets, Paul runs up to the top of the dune and says that he can see someone coming towards us. However, it was creepy because at this point when he noticed Paul, he just stood and stared at him. Fast forward, the man gets to the top of the dune where we were. By this point, I'm already nervous. After a bit of small talk, he came to ask whether we believed in God. There was a bit of a pause, and we could tell something was wrong with him. Of the 3 of us, Maddie was the one who said yes, and the reaction was creepy. The guy just pointed at Maddie and said, "It's you." He then started walking down the pit towards Maddie, and this was when we realized that he had a knife. Before I could rush him and take him down, he had already stabbed Maddie. As we wrestled, he stabbed my leg just above the knee. After realizing the knife had Maddie and my blood, he just apologized and left. Paul managed to call 999 and we were taken to the hospital, where we were tended to. But if this was not creepy, then I don't know what was. Blue-ringed octopus. I had a family in Australia, and for 2 Christmases when I was a teenager, we traveled from the UK to Brisbane to spend a month with them. I remember when I was 14 and we were there. This was the time I had a near encounter with death. It was also the first time I went there, and it was my worst experience in Australia. We were warned against moving around in bushes and any overgrown areas because of brown snakes, which are very venomous. However, since we were told that we should avoid any overgrown places, I didn't think that the beach would be dangerous. When we were at the beach, I had to take a piss, so I went behind some trees to pull aside my bathing suit and do my business. However, I noticed a massive snake curled up there when I got there. I didn't wait to find out whether it was a brown snake, so I just left. Fast forward, I went to the ocean and started waving my feet in the water. As I was doing this, a small creature emerged from under the sand and swam up to my toes. I quickly pulled my feet out of the water, realizing it was a tiny little creature. It looked like an octopus, and watching it swim around was just pleasant. I was taken away by its cuteness. I picked it up from the water with cupped hands, and just as I was admiring it, I heard a small bite. Not thinking much about it, I put the octopus back in the water and started moving back toward my family. However, the moment I got there, I just collapsed. I had lost all feeling in my body, but I could see everything that was going on. What scared me more was when someone said, "I think she's gone, mate." This was scary as hell because I couldn't even breathe properly. However, shortly after a little first aid, I was able to breathe normally again. The next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital with my whole family in the room with me. This was when I was told a blue-ringed octopus had bitten me, and even though it was tiny, it was fully grown. Date gone wrong. I had been talking to Christina for years, and I wanted to take her out on a date. It was in mid-July, so there were a lot of options. The best option was the beach or anything outdoors. Given that it was the first date, I decided to take her to a beach near me that allows trucks to drive on it with the proper permits. Since I frequently go there, this was not a problem for me. On the day of the date, none of us were going to work the following day, so we decided to hit the beach at night. It was just going to be the 2 of us, a little bonfire, and some drinks. Given that it was also weeknight and past 8 o'clock, I knew the beach would be practically empty. So as we headed there, we stopped at a 7-Eleven, bought a few supplies, and headed to the beach. I knew there was a spot that was a bit private, so I took her there. I had no idea how to light a bonfire, so after a few tries and the fire refusing to catch, we decided to leave the bonfire and just sit in the darkness. However, as we just sat there, Christina said that she could hear some sort of whisper. When I listened closely, I also heard it. I quickly switched on my truck's headlights and I noticed a shadow hiding in the tall grass ahead. When I walked up there, there was nobody. At this point, Christina asked me to come back, so I did. However, while there, I now heard humming coming from close by. Christina eventually begged me to return to the truck so we could leave. I was determined to beat up the guy, but I just let it slide. We then got into the truck and drove off, looking behind us to ensure we were not being followed. Welcoming the newcomers. When I was young, my family rented a beach house for the weekend in the summer. It was our first day at the beach, and so we were excited. We played at the beach before later going for dinner. When we returned, my brother Joey and I decided to go out to the sand dunes and slide down. With our parents' permission, we found some large cardboard boxes, cut them up and used them as sleds. We then found what seemed like the largest hill and started sliding down. It should be known that it was in the dark. After Joey went down the hill first, he noticed something in the water. When he told me to look, I couldn't see properly, so I slid down the hill to take a look as well. It was a black shadow just floating in the water and moving with the waves. Seeing this, we decided to move to a different hill, but the shadow was still there after sliding down. It was as if it was following us. After a while, as we watched from the top of the hill, it started rising, in the shape of a man stood in the water. We both dashed into the house and banged on the door behind us. We were yelling at our parents, telling them what we had seen, but they found no threat after our dad went and found no one outside. We then went to our room, but shortly after, we heard our mother scream. We found them staring out the window and we went downstairs to check on them. When we went there to take a peek outside, we found a naked man standing there smiling. Our dad threatened to call the cops on him, but he didn't move. Soon after, the cops were called, and I don't remember seeing that many cops in our house before. Shark attack. I remember when I worked for the ECB and I was sent over to Australia for 3 weeks to help prepare for the Cricket World Cup. At this time, we would mostly be done with everything on the agenda by noon, and so we had half a day to ourselves. One of these days, I decided to go to the beach and have a nice relaxing swim. I had been told that the waves at this time were very gentle. When I got to the beach, there was a group of school kids having their swimming lessons there. After a short while of playing around in the water, I heard this sort of siren in the distance. Immediately, all the kids got out of the water. However, I was nowhere near done with swimming. As I was enjoying the water, I heard the siren again, but I chose to ignore it because I didn't think it applied to me. Honestly, at first, I thought it was to tell the kids that their session was over. It turned out that there was a lifeguard close by and he came to get me out of the water. He was shouting at me from a megaphone, telling me that I needed to get out of the water. Eventually, he finally mentioned that there was a white shark around, and that's why I needed to get out of the water. I have never been more scared in my life than that day. Almost lost at sea. When I was a kid, my family drove me out to a relative's caravan so that we could visit the beach. However, this beach was just a seawall and some shale, but since the tide was in, you could actually get in the water and have a little swim. Even though I was bummed that I couldn't build sandcastles, there was still a lot to do for fun here. My cousin had an inflatable dinghy. In the moment it was inflated, my aunt proposed that my cousin and I just paddle on it. As we paddled out in the water with our plastic oars, we could hear the adults shouting from time to time not to paddle out too far. However, the urge was just too much, but by the time we noticed, the adults seemed very small. It got to the point that we decided to paddle back to shore. However, this was easier said than done. We kept paddling around on our plastic oars, but the gap between us and the adults seemed to be growing wider and wider. Eventually, Uncle Jack took off his shoes and shirt, jumped into the water and started swimming towards us. He then grabbed the dinghy and started dragging us back to shore, and by this time, my cousin and I were freaking out. We then found out that some strong currents were dragging us further into the sea. We would have been lost at sea if it weren't for Uncle Jack. 4th of July. When I was 20 years old, my girlfriend Stevie and I wanted to head over to the beach and watch the local beach fireworks show on the 4th of July. However, when we got to the main beach parking lots, they were all full. We ended up parking in a less crowded parking lot further down the road. After parking, we took our blankets and drinks and had to walk through a couple of tunnels to get to the beach site. It was literally a 20-minute walk to the main beach. Even though we were not that close to the fireworks show, it was better than nothing. By this time, the show had already begun. The beach was completely empty, so we just spread our blankets and enjoyed the show. About 10 minutes into the show, I heard some voices behind us, and when I looked back, I saw a group of people just staring into the fireworks. Nothing suspicious there. Eventually, the show ended and it was time to go back. As we were walking back through the tunnels, someone, who was definitely part of the group standing behind us, came up to us and started asking for help. He said his friend was injured, so he wanted to borrow our phone to call for help. However, something didn't feel right. My girlfriend and I started walking faster, saying we were in a hurry. Shortly after, I noticed a bunch of guys following us. Eventually, my girlfriend ran ahead of me to the car and I followed closely behind, evading these guys. I don't know what they planned to do to us, and I don't even want to find out.